Hi all, my name's Brett Manning. I'm trustee of the new Aussie Constitution Trust. If you follow this channel, you'll realise that I'm all about looking at a replacement for the current Australian Constitution to make Australia an independent nation and a republic. Now, if I was to come to you with a referendum question to change the Australian Constitution to make it a republic, it might look something like this. Do you support an alteration to the Constitution that makes Australia a republic? And then you might ask, well, what's the detailed changes proposed to the Constitution? And let's say I offered these words. Australia is a republic called the Republic of Australia. The executive government of Australia shall be run by a president as an Australian head of state. Australia will have a parliament that shall, subject to this constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Australian government. Pretty straightforward, right? After all, with this amendment we get rid of 20 pages of 21 pages in the current constitution. But if I did bring you this proposed referendum question with these changes to the Australian Constitution, there should be alarm bells going off in your brain right now. That's because this amendment would give the Parliament the decisions on every aspect of the operation of the country. There are no limits. It doesn't say how a Parliament is elected. It doesn't say what powers the Parliament might choose to give to the President. It doesn't limit in any way the powers of the Parliament to make laws on whatever it felt like. So fundamentally, this proposal would completely undermine the purpose of a constitution in the first place. The purpose of a constitution is to set down those things about the operation of your government that cannot be changed without coming back to the people for approval. And clearly this sort of wording would be totally inappropriate for a constitution. So I'm certainly not proposing that for changes to the Australian Constitution. But those of you who have been following what's going on with the referendum for a voice, indigenous voice to Australian Parliament, might just recognise this wording. It's not too dissimilar from the changes that the government is proposing for the voice to Parliament. So the voice to Parliament says that there'll be an indigenous voice to Parliament and that Parliament will make all the rules and all the conditions for the operation of that indigenous voice. There's no guidance, there's no limitations, there are no expectations whatsoever in the wording that is being proposed to support this amendment to Parliament. And that means that an indigenous voice to Parliament could be anything. In any future government who has control of the Parliament could change it. So it could be one thing today and another thing tomorrow. And unfortunately, this takes a very serious question on whether there should be an indigenous voice to Parliament. And it puts it in such a way that I think many people simply couldn't accept, because we just don't know what we're voting for. And if they take this approach and they put this proposal forward, they're doing a disservice to the Australian people. They've got no idea what they're voting for. They do a disservice to the indigenous people, because even if it passes, what have they actually secured? How does it operate? How will it operate in the future? And how will it be changed by successive governments one after another. If you're going to put up constitutional change, that is because you want to put something in place that cannot be altered without going back to the referendum. But you need to be specific about how this voice to Parliament will operate in this particular case. And if you don't know how that's going to operate yet, haven't reached that point, then we shouldn't be pushing forward a referendum at this stage. Work that out first. Give us some proper detail about proper changes to the Constitution, and let the Australian people decide if they want those changes. But right now we're going to have people who are voting for it because they will support it anyway. We'll have people who vote against it because they don't support it anyway. And then there's going to be people in the middle who may have supported it or may not support it, but they just don't know because there's no detail here about what they are supporting. And so they end up voting no as well. And the Indigenous people lose out unnecessarily. And it's a huge waste of taxpayers' money. If you want to put an Indigenous voice to Parliament, but you're not prepared to make any constitutional definition of that voice, then don't take it to a referendum. Pass legislation to establish an Indigenous voice to Parliament. You can do that now. The only reason that you're going to take it to a constitutional amendment is to lock it in. But if you want to lock something in, then we need to know what it is. If an Indigenous voice to Parliament is going to exist, then it needs to be clearly defined. What's its makeup and composition? How do people become elected? How does it interact with the Parliament? How does it make its views known? These things are not defined in this proposed amendment. They are critical, fundamental things. And just as I showed you in this example earlier, you would never support me saying, oh, let's make it a republic and the Parliament can work everything out. Okay? You'll be crazy to support that sort of amendment to the Constitution. And yet that's exactly what we're being asked to do with the Indigenous voice to Parliament. So let's get serious. If this is, the one chance for an Indigenous voice to Parliament to be put to the Australian people, get the amendment right. Make it clear. Make it a clear choice for Australians. This is why the new Aussie Constitution that is being proposed by the new Aussie Constitution Trust is a fully drafted, detailed document that locks down all those things that we would not want the Parliament to be able to change without the approval of the Australian people. Our proposal is fully detailed and it's open for discussion. We need to give this Indigenous voice to Parliament equal respect by being very specific about what it is that needs to be locked in the Constitution if the Australian people choose to have an Indigenous voice to Parliament. If you'd like to know more about the new Aussie Constitution, please go to the website at www.newaussieconstitution.com.au. Thanks for your time.